Hello, everyone. This is another episode from the Backup Chargers. This is Faceless Menace. I have a little bit of a weird one today. So, I was just thinking around, trying to figure out what I want to do for the next video. Thinking if I wanted to do something about my Wind Series list that did pretty okay. There's a bunch of other lists I could be doing, but really today, I think I'm actually going to be talking about just mid-range in general as a deck archetype in Grand Archive. So, this is what actually inspired me to talk about this is my Wind Series list, but we're going to go beyond that today as well. So, first of all, what is mid-range? So, mid-range is just a tempo of deck. It's a gameplay style that is somewhere between aggro and somewhere between control, almost forming its own little triangle here. So instead of being on one end with aggro being very fast and aggressive, or on the other with control, where you're trying to slow the game down as much as possible in order to eventually facilitate some kind of game plan. Mid range kind of has to be right between there in the very definition of it, mid range. But it has to be able to kind of float in order to succeed in any real capacity. What do I mean by that? So the last deck that I posted was my Lorraine Vow list. So that deck is very aggressive. It has a couple hallmarks of being mid-range. Of there's some control pieces in there, some ways to stall in the form of deflecting edge, library witch, stalwart, shieldmate. But those are more so just tempo pieces. They're not really supposed to direct the entire flow of the game, just make it so that I am the one that's dealing much more damage than the opponent. Mid range can do that, but they do a lot more too. So, for example, in this list with Wind Goja, with Seryu here, the goal of the deck is obviously flip Seryu. Seryu has a really great on attack that can just win the game by itself. Plus, obviously, if you have the various command cards, along with Harness Lightning, those are also just ways to win the game. But the way you get there can be a few different ways. You can turbo into Seryu. You can get there turn 3, no problem. Or you can wait, turn 6, 7, even later, depending on just how fast the game needs to go and how comfortable you are with using your resources and that tempo in order to actually beat the opponent. So to do so, there's a whole bunch of different speeds of cards, basically. So one thing you'll notice in here, for example, we have GCR and we have Pretentious Tengu, but no backup charger because we need other slots for other things, but we're still running, a Divine Relic that is just a fast draw card, doesn't need to put anything down, but we're also playing a slightly slower card that happens to get a quest counter at the same time. This is to make sure that we can actually get our cards when we need them, depending on the state of the game. If we look at the main deck here, we have some really, really slow cards. So we're looking at Besieged Fatestone. This is kind of a weird one. It is very slow in the fact that it is a 6 cost that just places itself down, and basically says you just do your whole turn doing this one thing, but that one thing is a tempo gain where you are materializing, usually leveling up to level 1 or 2, although you can use it to just grab a GCR, Tengu. More likely you're going to want to grab, if you're going to grab one of these, you're going to want a Nullifying Lantern, Trinket, some kind of control piece there, basically. You're also running some relatively fast cards, so Dungeon Guide is a lot easier to get out. That is just going to turbo out your game plan. We're running stuff like Crystallized Destiny. This doesn't do anything, really. It doesn't advance your game plan. It doesn't go neutral. It doesn't draw you cards. This exists just to slow the game down. You're preventing an instance of damage, and in the right matchup, you're also dealing with the rest of what your opponent is playing as well, because if they dealt 7 or more, or were to deal 7 or more. So that's kind of an example of one of the really slow cards in here. And then we move on to cards like Zephyr and Tempest Downfall, where you're just dealing with something now and immediately, and you're just making sure that you have that board control and you can kind of control the speed of the game. That's kind of the idea of mid-range in general, is you want to be the one that controls the speed. The benefit to this over aggro or control is that exact thing. You're able to power through control, where they might be taking a little bit longer on everything, but you still have enough interaction pieces to keep up with them. But you have some power plays as well. I mean, you can Dream Fairy a Frostborn Paladin, for example, and that's really huge, and you can hold up, an annul spell to protect it. This list is kind of funny. We got one main deck annul spell, but sideboard we got the other three in there. Tempest Downfall can just go face, but more likely you're going to want to use it to kill off allies. Those are the real uses to that there. Advantage over aggro. Again, you got stuff like Tempest Downfall, Stifling Trap, you can Baby Green to suppress weapons. Midrange does really, really well into aggro because you just have answers. Your deck is 90% answers. I mean, look here, we got the Annul, Crystallized, Expel, Resolute Stand, Baby Green, Dream Fairy, Zephyr, Winds, Tempest, Stifling, Scatter Essence. Not to mention flipping the Fate Stones, allies that can clear. I mean, there's just everything here is an answer, essentially, or cards that just directly contribute to the game plan. Now, the cons to this is your deck is a lot of answers, so sometimes you're just not able to actually get everything when you need it to. So, for example, there's games where I'm holding up a couple Dream Fairies, a Zephyr, some Tempest Downfalls, and I just really need a Journey's Beginning for that last quest counter, and I'm just not finding it. Or I need more Fatestone cards for Fatestone of Revelation to go neutral so that I can start, using Expel the Departed because they're dead in any matchup that's not Diao-Chan. This card's really nice because it just draws a card if you have two more Fatestone or Fatebound objects, which does mean you need your Fatestone, the Fabled Azurite, and one other one, but sometimes you can't find it. Your deck has a lot of various things. You try and do everything at once. When it works out, it works great, but you are kind of running into that problem of you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. Now, here's the other thing. Midrange is hard. Midrange is one of the most difficult archetypes to build correctly and play correctly. I won't really say the play is as difficult. Control is definitely a little bit more in that regard, where you are very reliant on the pilot to do it correctly. Midrange has a little bit of that aspect as well, but it's mostly the build, because you have to constantly update this for the meta. So this did really well at Yeti's about 2 weeks ago now, went 4-0 with this list. And I'm real happy with it. It did really great. The weird thing about it is this was I'm actually running one less Scatter Essence, one more Series Command. I only owned one Series Command, which was kind of weird. I was able to get it with that. But regardless of that, I didn't find a single Diao-Chan deck. At locals, this deck bullies Diao-Chan fractals because you can just keep popping them, keeping them below their kind of critical mass of fractals, so they can't actually get to their kill. They just won't have enough to do anything with them, which is excellent. At least not in time for you to just start popping off with your game plan. It's got Viridian Protective Trinket for that matchup. It's running the Beastbomb Boots. It's running Censor to turn off their float for Frostborn Paladins, etc. But then it's also, that part's good for a lot of decks. This deck has no float other than Scatter Essence, and Scatter Essence gets sided out if I'm not playing into Diao-Chan anyway, so I'm not really too concerned about that. But I was playing against Wind Diana, and that deck, this is very strange. I had decent matchups into those. I was barely able to scrape it out. Cards like Tempest Downfall and Stifle Trap really help in that regard. But, for example, I did play into one or two other Guoja lists, which is why I put the Cyclonic Fate Stone in here. But I do know that not as many people are playing lists where Cyclonic's going to do anything. A lot of people, if they're playing Guoja, are more on the water, the Genbu package, which they're just going to have an answer for Cyclonic. And a lot of times they're not even going to bother attacking with Genbu. They're just going to hold up a big Spell Shroud Taunt, which just doesn't do anything for, obviously. So that card needs to get swapped out for something else in that regard. Which is really why you need to be a good deck builder. And you need to be able to kind of adjust your list as the meta calls for it. So this is really the big problem with midrange. Now, if we look at some of my other decks, the big thing that I would say, this is a list from kind of before the season started. This is a theoretical Byakko list. So we kind of look at what we have going on with this, what's going well, what's not so great for a kind of mid-range build. So, first of all, let's get the elephant out of the room. Byakko sucks, as much as it hurts me to say. So, Byakko is just not that great. Having to suppress 8 separate times is so goddamn difficult. You're not doing anything the entire time you're suppressing. At best, you're gonna either go neutral or you're gonna do something like a Scavenging Raccoon to deny resources. Or this deck is running Jingjiao for a potential recover or to suppress on the opponent's end step, etc. So that on my turn I can draw, pass, Jingjiao come back, and I draw 2 more cards. Pot of Greed of the format is good. But other than that, Scattering Gust, I might be able to suppress 2 things at once, which can plus potentially, but it's so difficult right now without Baby Gray being here. This deck actually is a lot better with Baby Gray, but Baby Gray got banned, RIP. Hopefully we get one that's just Tamer class bonus in the next list. In the recollection reprints, I should say. So, what's wrong with this list here? So, there's a couple things. We have cards like Fleetfoot Philly. This card, if we kind of go by what we were talking about before, mid-range, you want the cards to be contributing towards the game plan, or you need it to be an answer. So Fleetfoot Philly doesn't do either of those. It's an ally, it can be suppressed, and it is kind of a non-bow with that because it's going to lose its counters. It doesn't get any counters from itself being suppressed, obviously, because it's going to be gone from the battlefield. Dream Fairy's fine, that's an answer. Cyclonic is fine, it is an answer. But the part that sucks about it is obviously it's not very good into every meta. We're looking at Scattering Gust. This does contribute to the game plan, so this works for it, but it's slow. Costing 4 is kind of a lot, and there's not many targets for it. We're looking at Baby Green, Jingjiao, Raccoon. You don't really want to hit the Philly, and if your Dream Fairy is still affecting something that matters, you don't usually want to be able to have to Dream Fairy again. So not a whole lot of good targets for it. Vertigress Decree hits a Fantasia, so that part's great, but same problem. Suppressing an ally is fine, but it's still just not consistent here. Not a bad card in this list, but you kind of have to take a look at the deck overall. Is this actually doing something? Whirlwind Threads. It puts a quest counter and goes neutral. It's not bad. It just spins its wheels, though. It doesn't help solve that problem of surviving. Cards that can do both are really good because you can just start churning through what your deck is supposed to do and hopefully not die. Advent of the Shenju. This card is... I wish it was better. Costing 4 is just way too much. I don't understand why this thing costs 4, honestly. Costing 4 and being Advanced Element because we can revive our Shenju? Yeah, we kind of need to if it dies. But but this card's just so unplayable. If your Shenju dies, just concede. Let's be honest. Um, Veiling Breeze. We got a lot of win cards here. This does stall. This deck is very, very good at stalling. But if anything, what this deck is really showing is that this is much more of a control deck than a mid-range deck. Because it's not actually keeping up that tempo play. That's the other part that this deck is really missing. We have Slime Shield, which does stall. Again, that's stall. Veiling Breeze, it stalls. We have Innovative Agility, it stalls. But nothing really takes away from what the opponent is doing. You're not denying any resources. Verdigris Decree is kind of the exception. It destroys something and can suppress for more. The Dream Fairy is nice with it because that can be a semi-permanent way to remove things. Scavenging Raccoon as well. And then the Cope answer is you hope to have 7 or more influence with, 7 or more cards in memory with Zhang Zhao entering. Okay, congrats. You're one for oneing now. You're not doing anything with this. So this would fall under kind of control list aspect. You're not doing anything to prevent your opponent from executing their game plan in reality. You're just spinning your wheels and stalling. Not to say control decks as a whole can only stall and that they can't also deny your opponent their game plan, but especially in this meta right now, full-on slow control decks just don't really work because it's just much too fast. So even though I say mid-range in this current meta, it's going to feel a little bit more like control, but it is still mid-range for example, that Seiryu list there. Material deck as well. We're not really looking at a whole lot. Art of War is really nice. It's stall. Backup Charger for draw, Tengu for draw, and a quest counter. Bell also gets a quest counter. Boots are fine. Those can kind of... Boots are funny. They do kind of deny resource because if your opponent wastes a card and before you give Spell Shroud, then that's really nice. But that's about all it's going for this. Now we look at... This is a funny little list here. So this one actually does sort of fall under a mid-range list, actually. So, funny enough, I came up with this again in the preseason before full set revealed. So, Dawn of Ashes and Zhu Chang. These cards are pretty classic now. There's a couple decks running around with those two cards in them as their domains. Because they're just very good at denying the opponent tempo. Zhu Chang, making your first thing your opponent plays cost 2 more, is great. That means they're playing less cards at every turn, or they're eating resources. This is great. If they want to also attack it, great. They're going to waste time doing that. Zhu Chang is amazing because of that reason. It just bullies. Dawn of Ashes. Everything costs more for your opponent, basically. I mean, they're obviously not going to all be running exclusively basic element cards. We're kind of stepping a little bit away from that now. There's less 100% water, wind, and fire lists going around. There's a nice kind of mix. However, this will affect a lot of decks by and large, by a considerable margin. Hub kind of contributes to the gameplay. We need a lot of domains because we are an Eternal Kingdom deck here. This is kind of the big resource engine. Keep of the Golden Sashes is also, it's a little mini Zhu Chang, essentially. Your opponent isn't eating resource to do so, but they will be paying 1 more for their first card every single turn. We're running Navigate the Streets, that's Float. Dormant Sacrificial Altar is just another draw to memory. It goes neutral, effectively. So this does contribute to the game plan. We're running some Float, more Float. Fracturize, which is removal. Frostbind, which does count as removal. Storm of Thorns. This is also really good at denying and can deal damage back. So this is contributing towards a game plan. It's very nice for that. Obviously, this is a Neos deck, so competitiveness aside, this is kind of a good example of a mid-range deck. Because once you get there, you're kind of stalling for a little while, and then once you get to level 3, You can play stuff like Atmos Armor Ares, which will stall considerably with the Atmos Shield tokens. For people that don't know what Atmos Shield tokens do, they should be down here. So you can rest it next time a Neos element unit would take non-combat damage, prevent 2 of it, and then you can redirect attacks from other Neos units to a shield token. And that includes from a shield token to a different shield token. So they're very annoying to deal with, if I'm being honest. And they also buff Ares for each one. So they do work really well for that. Refabrication, just to draw cards. It's fine. It's not the best card in the world. I'd say it's, in my opinion, the 3rd best main deck Neos card. That's why it's in here. And then Blade of Creation is just a really big damage cleave, because you, of course, are Tony, so you make 3/1 swords, so you have access to a 7 damage, 0 to 1 cost cleave for most of the late game, along with just getting over taunts for big damage with Archon Broadsword. So that's kind of the gameplay plan for this deck. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting with those domains to stall the game out, and then trying to clear board with the cleave. I'm not saying it's a very good deck. I haven't even played it more than a couple games, but you know, this is a really good example of a mid-range deck. Obviously, depending on what the meta is, you have to change things around. Again, Fracturize is always going to be really solid. Frostbind is decent, but you might want to change it out for a different negate, possibly, or at least in the sideboard. Have access to Frozen Dismissal if you want to make sure you can have more ally hate. Storm of Thorns, maybe you just don't need Storm of Thorns as much, depending on what the meta is. Maybe, you know, if allies aren't as prevalent. Funny enough, this card's actually pretty good right now because allies are currently really, really important. But, you know, if we go back to Diao-Chan being definitively the tier 1 best deck right now, then Storm of Thorns would be put out for a little while until allies are back in. You know, these things are cyclical, so you just gotta keep track of that and make sure you know what's going on with the meta. And that includes both at, you know, online regionals, if you are someone like me that does that a lot, online Yetis each week, which are a little bit more casual than that, obviously, or just at your local level. You just gotta make sure you know what people are playing. I have someone that's took my Win Series list and said, okay, well, we have exactly 1 player that does anything with allies. I'm gonna cut out most of these ally hate cards. I don't need Cyclonic. I don't need Tempest Downfall, which I told him you should keep Tempest Downfall, at least a couple, because, you know, it goes face. Why not, right? Doesn't need the Zephyr. Doesn't really need the Dream Fairy too much. Resolute Stand can get cut. You know, you can cut out a lot of different things and swap them for other things that you will need in that case. Obviously, you know, if you're very spell-heavy meta, put that in null spell back up to 4. These are the kinds of things you gotta do when you're trying to build mid-range. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any other thoughts on the matter. This has just been kind of an unhinged rambling. Expect a little bit more content like this every once in a while. We're still trying to get the channel specifics figured out, get some more video ideas going. We have a couple other things in the works, some actual scripts written down, but some of those are taking a little while. But right now we're just trying to have fun with this. Again, I'm gonna keep rambling if you guys like this kind of stuff. Otherwise, let me know in the comments one way or another. I'll see you again soon. Bye.